Hello and welcome to Notes and Wires, where I'm talking to various guests who regularly respond to today's aspects of electronic music and music technology in an attempt to map the current electronic music network. Today, I'm going to chat with Madeleine Bloom, musician, composer, tutor, and support guru, oblique strategist, sound pack creator, and host of Sonic Bloom, the highly frequented #1 site about all things Ableton, Push, and Max for Live. Hello, Madeleine. How are you?
Hi, I'm good.
You're set to follow pretty much a DIY approach as a one-woman band, playing multiple instruments and incorporating everything from the piano, mbira, upright bass, cello strings, harps, ticking clocks, train sounds, water, paper, coffee brews, stones, glass, ice, music boxes, and many more objects in your music. You've also been quoted saying, if I could take more gear and instruments with me on stage, I would. But since I don't have a car, I can only take as much as I can on public transport. So I believe you started creating started playing the classical guitar at around the age of 6 and also sang in choirs shortly after. How did you get where you ended up as a composer and performer, that is, from playing a classic acoustic instrument to a multi-instrumentalist with a main focus in electronic music?
I don't know. I think that's a good question. It just kind of, I've always been interested in music. I can't remember a time when music wasn't important for me. I was singing before I started speaking, and my parents were playing me music on headphones when I was a baby because we only had a one-room flat, basically, so just a tiny apartment. And I don't know. Once I started playing in bands and when I started recording on music, on 4-track machines back then. Mm-hmm. There was a point when we recorded it and then someone else mixed it and it didn't sound at all what I thought it should sound like. And for me, I kind of always assumed that was part of being a musician as well, because you shape, how everything sounds. And, so mixing and all that technology is just part of it if you want to make music. Even if you want to record a guitar, I think you should be able to, basically you have to know gear as well when you're a guitarist, because you have to know how to, set your pedals to sound great and your amp. So I thought mixing was just an extension of that. So it never occurred to me that this was something that others didn't do or didn't want to do. So it just felt natural.
So the technological aspect was right there for you in the beginning?
Yeah, well, the thing is, I grew up with technology, kind of. I was born in the GDR, and my father was an engineer and inventor, and he brought back computers already, the ones that you had to load with data sets back then. Mm-hmm. So that was very kind of a normal thing for me, and the way basically my brother and I both learned how to do everything. So we also learned how to, use a stereo or something, or like use the microphone in the tape deck and stuff like that. And we always just learned what not to do because that would break things, and then just have fun with things. And I think that helped a lot because I just grew up not seeing technology as something weird, but as something fun.
And you mentioned some bands you were in. What kind of bands were those?
Well, I started my first band with friends after I had asked around if any of the bands that already existed would like to have me, and they all said, or some of them said at least, that they wouldn't take any girls because we can't carry our own amps. So I was like, okay, then I'm just gonna go look for girls that play. And I found basically we had like a normal kind of rock and roll 4-piece, and just basically tried to figure out how to write songs in that kind of context. And I guess it was kind of indie pop rock, I guess you could say. Actually, friends that had been to the US kind of came back and said like, oh yeah, you should listen to the Breeders, you kind of sound a bit like the Breeders. So kind of like that a bit maybe, but less professional, of course. More school band. And then the second band was the same setup, but we kind of started experimenting with other things. Like we had an intro, for example, where we played on glass rims. And just tried to kind of try different things. So it kind of got more into a direction of kind of, I guess you could say, trip hop as well after a while, because our drummer could play really cool things. He liked drum and bass, jungle back then, and so he tried just playing the rhythms as one drummer. That should have been impossible to play.
So you slowly transitioned into more experimental music or approaches.
Yeah, I kind of basically, for me, the guitar was the first instrument because that's what I had as an option. I went to my parents and said, okay, I want to play guitar, piano or violin, and they were like, yeah, how about guitar? and so that's how I ended up playing the guitar, and that's why you don't really hear it much in my music. And I later kind of got piano lessons as well, and I've always been interested in playing other instruments, especially in our bands. We kind of, whenever we took breaks, we just swap instruments. I started drumming as well, and playing the bass, and I've always been interested in anything that makes a sound. So that's why I like everyday sounds in my music as well.
On your website, it says that you stumbled upon electroacoustic music while you were studying media design. So how did that enhance your artistic vocabulary to the point you eventually switched sides? And first of all, what has been your main focus while being in media design education?
I kind of didn't have a focus. I tried to do as many things as possible. Things I didn't do was things like 3D animation, because if you want to get into that, you really have to become a specialist right away, because that's not so simple. I just kind of did everything else, like photography, video, graphic design, and even like mixed media, even did things with metal and fabrics and stuff. So it was not very restricted. I did everything that I as you would do it at an arts college or something, where you just where the focus is rather on expressing yourself and doing that through different things and kind of figuring things out than doing it with a specific focus. And I don't know, I find visuals quite important as well, because I have synesthesia. I see colors with music, and so it kind of always, the connection for me was always there, and I thought that was normal until I learned that other people didn't have that. So I think that's where that comes from, and that's why I also like making my own music videos and stuff like that. And it also helps me with Sonic Bloom, because to do the web design and the graphics and stuff. So
you do all that by yourself?
So far I do everything. Yeah.
Is there any obvious connection for you there between what you did in media design and what you do musically now?
Well, with what I studied in electroacoustic music, because basically a lot of the things we learned were like sound engineering. You know, how does a compressor work? How does a reverb work? And really going down to to the electric connections and everything. So you could basically learn how to build one yourself as well. And I wasn't sure how helpful I would find that, but I found it really helpful when I started getting into mixing more. So I'm using that a lot. And then microphoning was a huge thing because in electroacoustic music, there's a lot of people who work with field recordings as well. And I found that really inspiring because that's how I'd always seen things, and that's what I'd kind of always done. I just recorded some everyday objects into my music when I was doing ping pong recordings on tape as well. So I just learned how to do good microphoning, and I basically, the microphone is still my most important tool in the end, because if I have a good mic or just something to record it with, like a phone now, I can just capture really interesting sounds, and I can shape that into rhythms or melodies or whatever I want.
I was more asking because to me it seemed like you originally studied media design to become a media design professional. And then recognized, music is actually a field I can express myself more.
No. It was more that music was always what I wanted to do. The thing was that just I knew I didn't want to study music in itself because I've always had my own style, and I knew quite a lot of people who studied music and said just the way how it's set up, at least in Germany, it's very strict, and you have to learn all the compositional rules, and they kind of make you lose your own style. And I didn't want that, so I was looking for something else while my parents didn't approve of me trying to make music professionally. So that was basically like that was the plan B, basically, media design. And then by the time I'd finished my degree, the Kirch Media AG had gone bankrupt, and no one was paying good money for that sort of thing anymore. And I didn't want to work 80 hours a week in an ad agency and never have time for music. That just no. So I've been I worked as a video editor as well for TV for a bit, and I tried all kinds of different things. But ultimately, what I was way more passionate about was always music. And if I was just kind of trying to work as a freelancer or some like self-employed in any way, then why not just do it with music instead and use all the other skills to basically enhance that?
You already talked a bit about field recordings. Now, what made you move towards electronically processed music and sounds? Because it becomes obvious that you have a soft spot for these types of sounds when one listens to your music. So, there's a certain what I would call plasticity about sound in your music. So the way you stretch and manipulate sounds, almost like a sculptor.
Yeah, that kind of that's how music feels a lot like as well, even with mixing and EQing. So, I grew up in a pretty little flat where if you wanted to listen to music, you used headphones a lot. So I was basically listening to a lot of music on headphones, and the most exciting music was something where, first of all, things would happen in the stereo field, because that feels a lot more natural to me. Like, for example, if you listen to the Beatles on headphones, it sounds really strange these days, especially because we don't do it like this anymore. And then it's just like, okay, so this instrument is there and that is there, and it felt like I thought it was interesting that they put it up to the sides and so on, but it felt like kind of like unnatural because it was so kind of like stiff, because they were always in that spot, which of course would have been very difficult to change back then.
Right.
But I don't know, in the early 90s I discovered electronic music as well, like, lots of things from the UK, like things on Warp Records and so on, because a lot of people in my hometown always try to play me music that I didn't know yet. They kind of had that as a game, because then I was always very interested in music, and I was basically, in record stores a lot of the time as well, just checking out new music and deciding which albums to get that I could afford. So I got to know a lot of new music as well that other people might not even see as music, because they were made by mathematicians, for example, like S&D. And so it's kind of, but for me, like, music is maths and physics as well. I kind of grew up with like learning about this sort of thing. I read a lot of books about physics as a child, so I found this always very intriguing. And so it's kind of like, I like just kind of having something that's more active, and like I basically like to hear sound that is like really around me, and where I feel like almost I can feel it or see it or something, like where it basically triggers another sense in other people as well. That's what I'm basically always trying to compose in a way that I create images or kind of like small short films in people's heads, because this is how music works for me. So I'm trying to kind of just express that so that others can kind of feel it as well, even though it's going to be different for everyone else.
Do you also use surround sound?
I would love to, but I currently can't afford that, no.
Because I mean, for someone like Susan Ciani, that's very important.
Yeah, I find that very, very intriguing. Also, like the new Dolby plugin they presented last year at Loop, for example. I had heard about this and like really great things, and I think it's really exciting. The only problem still is that you have to have such a system, you know, that you can access. I would love to do this, but it costs quite a bit of money.
And what's your special field of interest when it comes to physics and math?
I don't know, just how basically you can explain so many things in life with that as well, how because it's all interconnected. It's not just this is maths and this is physics, like how we learn it at school, but that it's, you know, like the way, for example, Ableton Live works with a track delay, that you have like if you have a negative track delay, then everything else is going to be you know, delayed by that amount, because that's just physics, because we can't travel back in time. So it's actually kind of really simple explanations how the world works for me. So I've always found that really intriguing. Like, for example, why does the apple fall down and all of these things? And it's kind of, you know, like that kind of extends to like how you bend the string, for example. Or the same if you do it within the computer with the pitch bend, for example. So this is kind of like also physics. So yeah, I don't know if that's too abstract.
No, not at all. You already mentioned a couple of places, and you're living close to, or at least in the vicinity of Berlin.
Yeah, I live in Berlin, yeah.
Okay, and Berlin is, of course, one of the most thriving German cities when it comes to music and genres that are constantly being merged together. So how do these local ties affect or inform you in your work? Or are they relevant at all in your everyday life?
Only in the sense that I get to mix and master techno, while I personally don't listen to techno, I guess. I don't know, like for me, I had hoped that it would be more diverse, and it feels like in Berlin within the last decade or so, it's kind of narrowed in what's been getting important. You know, there used to be a lot more kind of like broken beats and drum and bass music. They still exist, but if you look at like the bigger picture, it's very little compared to techno and house, and it's mostly just techno. And it's for me, like the techno I like the best is Detroit techno. So that's the kind of techno that a lot of people don't recognize as techno anymore, because it's got too much jazz in it, I guess. So I'm not sure. I mean, I do have kind of like bigger beats in my the album that I've been working on for quite some time now, that's almost finished. So I guess it kind of could come from, the electronic music scene in Berlin. Other than that, I also tried getting into synths, like hardware synths preferably, because like before I never felt I needed that, because you can use a lot of field recordings to do synth sounds as well. The only thing where it's not as easy to do is when you want to have a bass synth. That's kind of more tricky to do with field recordings. And if I didn't have anything, I always had my voice to just kind of create a sound to start with. But I don't know, that's kind of a newer thing for me, like getting into synths. I used to be the person at Ableton sometimes say like, I hate synths, just to kind of rile everyone up, because everyone was like synths all the time. But I prefer the analog synths still. I'm very much into warmer sounds. That's why I like field recordings as well. I don't like the 80s synth styles, for example. They sound very cold to me.
And you mentioned your new album you're working on, or have been working on for a while. How is that going?
I finally mixed the songs. Well, the thing was, I basically had written and recorded most of the songs before I got really sick. And then I made the mistake of listening to the songs when I was feeling bad, in a kind of way like, look, but they're really good, so you just have to get better, and then, things will continue. And then I got used to the terrible sounding mixes. And that made it very difficult to mix. I'm not going to make that mistake again. I'd rather not listen to them and just listen to my old songs instead, or something that I finished. So that was a nightmare, to be honest, because I kept trying, and I was like, I can't tell. I had to try analysis tools and everything to kind of trust my senses more again, because I just felt like I just couldn't tell anymore. I've only written and finished one song in the last year or so, but it's there's a lot of things to catch up for Sonic Bloom. That's why so I've got one more song to write and produce, and I tried over Christmas, and it was not good. I'm really out of practice, but I made it very difficult for myself. I tried a really weird key and a odd time signature, and with a difficult subject lyrical wise. So I'm gonna, that's the plan for the next few weeks, and then I'm definitely gonna finish that. It's just, it can be tough to kind of have to live with songs for too long, because I feel like I should be writing something else. But at the same time, the last song needs to kind of fit musically as well, because the rest of the album fits really well, the songs. So I feel I'm a bit stuck with an old thing that should have been finished a long time ago, but that's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah. At Loop 2017, you said that you're running Sonic Bloom to help funding your own musical projects. And the site, which was put together in fall 2012, offers anything from tips to tutorials and workshops, as well as sound packs. Is a quite well-established Ableton Live resource by now, with about 100,000 views per month, which is quite impressive.
In winter, in summer it's less, but that's why when people, are like, should I learn tutorials now? Go out in the park.
When people have nowhere else to go. So how did you originally come up with the idea?
Well, I was working as a technical support at Ableton, and I kind of got really tired of writing out the same tutorials and emails over and over again, because I couldn't find a good resource that didn't skip a step or two. And this is where people always would trip up. So I asked if it would be okay if I just wrote tutorials on my music website blog. And it was okay. And then my colleagues started sending out those links as well, because it's just easier.
Right.
They still do. And And then, I knew that it was not going to last forever at Ableton, and they told me I was not going to get a permanent contract, but instead I could work as a freelancer, and I wasn't happy with that. So instead I thought, I'd realized while working in phone support that there were a lot of people who basically called because they needed not technical help, but tutorials, a teacher. And quite often people just kind of get stuck on like little things, and then they feel like they can't move forward. And I thought, well, what if I offer this kind of via Skype, that they could just, get one lesson and they can ask all the questions that they have, and then I'll just explain how everything works, and then they can just continue doing their things. The same with live performances. There were a lot of people who were kind of like, it's just for electronic music, right? And it's like, no, it's actually not. You can use it for anything. You can use it as a looper as well, technically, with some other things. And so I just thought this could definitely work as a kind of job if I just combine it with some other things like mixing and mastering services and selling some products as well. And yeah.
I guess what's also a thing is that support questions are also often related to more general technical questions. I mean, they are not always related to one little question all by itself, but it's always related to a general understanding of how things work, be it MIDI related or whatever.
Yeah. One of my favorite questions in support was, my MIDI doesn't make any sound. And I always felt like writing back, well, mine doesn't do either, but that's okay. And so you kind of get a really good understanding of what trips people up over and over and over as well. Because those are the questions that you just keep getting again and again. So I kind of felt like I got a really in-depth view of like where Ableton Live users, especially beginners, kind of got stuck. And so I thought that makes it easier for me, for example, to teach something than someone saying like, well, the only experience I have is like where I got tripped up.
Right.
That might not be the same spots, So I felt like I had more knowledge about these kind of things. Plus, I know certain things, how they work in the back end, which is also extra information. And since I had learned about like online marketing for my music, but it doesn't work well for music at all, because it's too much music. Like you need to have something that makes you exceptional in the story, basically, which might not be what you want to do musically. But it works for things like Sonic Bloom because just the regularity and everything, and so I just thought like, well, yeah, I'll just use all my skills. I mean, it's a very varied job as well. And I always felt like being employed is not quite right for me because it means kind of do the same things over and over and over. And I like doing different things, so for me now I have to, like, I don't know, today I'm going to have to do some accounting and just email support and things like that, and then write a new tutorial where I get to test some new plugins, for example, and then tomorrow I'm going to mix someone's songs, and the next time master something, and then I'm going to do some sound design things again, and then teach a workshop or whatever. So it's kind of really different jobs that I get to do, and it keeps things more interesting, because otherwise I get bored quite easily, because I always feel like there's too much interesting stuff in the world to just do the boring thing over and over.
So there is no typical day in the life of Sonic Bloom?
No, not really. I mean, there's the only thing that's typical is that in the beginning of the month I'm going to have to do the accounting, like the big accounting, and then I'm definitely going to do social media and emails pretty much every day, but everything else is basically up for grabs.
How does what you do as a tutor or what you do on your blog and the interaction with other users, how does all of that inform your own musical practice?
I'm kind of still figuring that out, because basically I just I started building up Sonic Bloom, and I was doing lots of things for Sonic Bloom, and I didn't have time for music, and then I got very sick.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't have time for music because I was reading studies to try and figure out my diagnosis. and now I'm basically trying to get back to a balance where I get enough time for music. I can only talk much about like live performance. I did a live performance again last week at the Royal Music Academy in Aarhus, Denmark. After giving the workshop on live performance, and basically the only rule for the live performance workshop was get out of your comfort zone. So they were not all working with Ableton Live, actually quite the opposite. A lot of them were working with live coding and Max, for example. And I noticed, for example, that telling people over and over that wanted to build their own first live performance sets to take it easy and not do everything at once has finally helped me, because I used to be someone who tried to do everything and made it extremely complicated for myself. And I still kind of make it complicated because I have quite high expectations for myself. But I still try to make it easier now, so that I for example, I get terrible stage fright when I have to play for the first few times again. And then it slowly gets better. And I had blackout on stage. But the thing was that now I have an option where I can just go like, well, then I'll just let it run for 4 more bars, and I'll remember enough to keep going. And so no one actually noticed that I was blacking out, which is a big plus, because it meant that I'd made it safe enough so that it works as a performance. Because I used to have setups that were so crazy that if I messed something up, there'd be no sound. I mean, which showed quite clearly that it was all live and that there was very little playback. But it still made me a lot more nervous. So I feel like it's always a back and forth that I'm learning from them as well. And I've been explaining them like some nice extra things that you can do for live performance that I use. And then I saw how others started using that there, and I was like, oh yeah, all right, that's really cool. So you get new perspectives by teaching, and then seeing how they incorporate something that basically you never thought about as well. Same with questions. I get a lot of interesting questions where just like, I never thought about this, and I haven't written a tutorial about this either yet, for example.
Returning briefly to Ableton Live, did that leave an impact on you, or did you just always use Live? I mean, I'm asking the question because Live is not just another DAW, but a production environment that reshaped the way we go about music production, or many people go about music production these days, as it incorporated techniques from the remix and DJ culture.
Well, the thing is, like, I only got into Live with Live 6. I tried Live 4 briefly, and I just really didn't like it. It had too little features back then for me that, and I got into it because of live performance in the first place. So I'd learned lots of other DAWs before that already. So I had a decent understanding of how they all worked. And then I got stuck with Live because I liked the way I could do sound design with it. I liked that better than the other DAWs I'd used. It's just for me, I think it's a matter of taste and how you imagine you do things. And for example, I used the session view mostly for live performance, and otherwise only in the early stages of production. So I do work in a linear way a lot, because with all the little details, if I try to do that in clips and loops in a session view, it would be. I tried to do that. It just ends up a complete mess. So for me, that just doesn't work. It's just not the way I do things. But I think it might also have to do with the fact that, first of all, I come from classical music. So it is linear, the way you learn things. And then I learned how to use, tape recorders and so on. And that was linear as well. So everything that I learned prior to Ableton Live was the old linear way. So it might just be that that's why I still work like that or something. It's just, I feel like Ableton Live gives you the option to work in whatever way you like. The only thing that I'm missing is that there, like with Push 2, for example, or even 1, there should be more features for when you're working in the arrangement view. Because I feel like it kind of almost becomes useless, or you have to kind of click on things to select with the mouse, and then you can do something and push again. And that feels kind of not very flowy to me. And it feels like it becomes kind of like a thing that was useful and is only useful partially now, even though it's a big part of Ableton Live as well. The arrangement view, it's half, I'd say.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I feel like you can use it in so many different ways, and that's what I found the most intriguing. You can misuse it. For example, I like using warping not in a way to fix timing mistakes or something, but rather to use it in an extreme way. So, for example, I might use a field recording, then warp it until the very end, put some warp markers in to get some interesting kind of rhythmical things going or something. Yeah. And then warp that and as long as I can, and then I might even consolidate it and do it again and even again and again and again.
Is there something that characterizes electronic music production for you as opposed to just music production?
Yeah, well, there's quite a difference in there. I mean, the way a lot of people now work less and less with microphones, because you can just do everything in the box or just plug it in or something. So that makes things easier as well and different. But apart from that, I don't know. Like, it's easier. I mean, like if you can just move things around on the computer, you don't have to decide what should come first, or should there be another part in between. Do you want to put a bridge in or a break or something? You can just do that later on, and you don't have to finish it right away either. Like with people that work with hardware synths, they basically just have to kind of record it to have it sound the exact same way, because if they're going to turn off the devices and then turn them back on, they're still not going to sound exactly the same.
Talking about decisions, you're known to be an avid fan of Brian Eno's and Peter Schmidt's oblique strategies.
Oh yeah, you've got a pair.
Yes. And you also create your own, which you share on your blog or on Twitter. Is the interest for the oblique strategies, which I guess could be perceived as a sort of analog generative method, tied to anything that is integral for you to electronic music, or is it? I mean, is it something that is of particular help for you if you utilize them in electronic music production?
It's not necessarily about electronic music production, but more in the sense of like creativity, like how sometimes we just get stuck in our ways, and if you do that, then something like this can be really helpful. That tells you do this, and the thing is, they don't tell you exactly what to do. So you can choose. You can choose if it says, like, for example, use effects, and I do more concrete things as well, because they're still kind of oblique, because I'm not telling you do this with a bass line or whatever. So basically, whatever you get, you can choose. You always still have to choose your own path of how you want to interpret it. So it's kind of not very specific, and that I feel it creates a limitation, but also opens possibilities. And I find this is how creativity works the best. So this is why I'm very interested in that sort of thing.
Could it also be that it sort of simulates a dialogue in the absence of someone else? Because, I mean, one thing I think that characterizes a lot of electronic music production is that people work alone.
Yeah.
Because they can.
Yeah, that might be. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because you don't get very much feedback, or sometimes even when you get feedback, then might be frustrating. Like, I had one song where I felt like it was not quite right in the mix, and then whenever I played it to fellow producers, they were like, "It needs hi-hats," because it didn't have hi-hats. But the thing is, it didn't need hi-hats because I already used vocal snippets basically as a kind of like replacement of hi-hats or cymbals. So for me, it's kind of, I think it probably has quite a lot to do with that. I never thought about it like that, but I mean, it's kind of getting feedback without getting feedback from someone else.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically how I would use tarot cards as well. I don't believe that they can really tell the truth or anything, but if I'm not sure about what I want to do about something, I could, lay them down and then look at that, and then it's more like your reaction to something that's more important. So it functions kind of like feedback. So it tells you something, and then you go, "No, I don't like this," or "Yeah, this is great," or with the oblique strategies, you can just go like, "Well, so it says warp something, so I might just warp whatever, something I've never warped, like my voice or whatever."
Actually, pull one out and see how you would react to that. Just
okay.
Well, I mean, distorting time. That's what we do anyway in this video recording.
We should distort time. That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good idea. I don't. What would I would probably do something with delays and reversing, just as a. That's what popped in my head first. That's I think what I would try first. But I feel like stuff like that kind of gives you interesting new ideas to kind of just what you could try that you've never done.
Mm-hmm.
And this is always what kind of keeps you doing new things and not ever standing still, because that's
Right.
kind of like the worst you can do as a creative person, to kind of stand still.
Yeah.
It's always about learning more, doing other things, and getting new experiences and skills.
Women in electronic music. In 2016, you've been involved in the compilation album Rojava, which was curated by the collective Female Pressure. And the project was primarily put together to raise awareness about the Kurdish female resistance movement in Rojava, also known as Democratic Federation of Northern Syria. Female Pressure, on the other side, is an international network of female, transgender, and non-binary artists in the fields of electronic music and digital arts, founded by Electric Indigo, that comprises over 2,100 members from 74 countries. This leads to a weird contradiction, really. On the one side, and due to its technological environment, the electronic music scene is associated with forward-thinking attitude, progress, creative freedom, and greater aesthetic tolerance, particularly when it comes to the question of what can be music or genres. On the other side, certain patriarchic or heteronormative structures are being carried forth, including the occasional outbursts of sexism or sexist stereotypes on gear-related sites or forums. And while there have been early electronic music pioneers like Susan Ciani or Wendy Carlos, the visibility of female and non-binary artists is still an issue. I mean, from typical music festivals, discussion groups about music gear and technology, to trade shows, and even things like this, YouTube videos or interviews. So where are all these women? is the first question that pops up if one takes a snapshot at the scene, and why are they not there?
Well, the thing is that basically girls from the beginning are told that technology is not for us, that's for the boys. So that's where it all begins already in childhood. There's studies that now say that by the age of 3 or 4, kids have a very exact understanding how men and women are supposed to behave. So we've got rules. And apparently technology is masculine. Who would have thought that? And the thing is, like, so a lot of girls grow up being told that, like, for example, if the parents have one computer, that their brother can use the computer, and she can maybe afterwards, if he ever gets offered or something. And I think that makes a huge difference for me. For example, that I grew up being told that it's absolutely normal to do something, made me think it was normal. And then I only later on realized that it was less girls, and then it was, lots of stereotypes as well, that I've been told that I can't do this. I just yesterday had a discussion where I keep being called guys, and then it's not even several people at Sonic Bloom, it's just me. And then when I just pointed out, because what I can tell is that they always think it's just a man behind it again. Mm-hmm. So I do point it out if they're not aware of it. And then he kept calling me bro. It's like, dude, I'm a woman. And then I basically had to say, like, oh yeah, but you basically like a bro. It's like, well, I know it's supposed to be a compliment, but in the end it kind of isn't. And so I just said, like, would you be okay with me calling you sis if it's not a problem?
Right.
And he was like, yeah, all right. So this is basically, so everything is always thought to be like, if it's music tech, everyone thinks a man. So that basically kind of promotes the stereotypes as well. So if everyone thinks music technology is for men, then girls are going to think that maybe that's not something to get into. Then later on, others, like their teachers, might not support them as much as the boys or young men at school, for example, or university or whatever, and you're also neglected to get jobs. Like a friend of mine is an Ableton certified trainer, and she always learns about like what the other certified trainers are being asked to do, being offered. And it turns out quite often she isn't even offered the same job as they're all offered, and the only difference is that she's female. And things like also hearing from friends that they apply for a job as, like, say, a sound engineer because that's what they studied. But then when they're applying for applications, they basically say, oh, you're a woman, well, you can reapply as a secretary or something. That still happens, unfortunately. And if you hear that a couple of times, even if the majority wouldn't do this kind of thing, but you just kind of hear it from them, and then it just makes a lot of women just kind of stop doing this because it's just too much trouble. So you really have to love it. And then another thing is that after a certain point, you kind of, the thing is, like, if you have children as a woman, that makes your career as a musician very difficult. Yeah. So a lot of women drop out then, because even if both partners are musicians, then it's in general that the woman stays home and the man still goes on tour. So this is like the old kind of sex roles that we still follow too much. So it's the same problem as in the rest of society. So the difference is just that music technology is very male dominated still, and the more male dominated it is, the tougher it is still for women to get in, because it's probably most of the time not conscious, but like there's always some that basically want to keep women out. I've actually gotten rape threats for moderating a music show on music technology, and that really shocked me that this could still happen.
Was it on while you were moderating a music talk?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that was like, I mean, if you look, the viewer numbers are like in the 3,000s or something, generally in the video. So it's out of 3,000 viewers, there were enough that felt me moderating this from time to time to be a real threat, so that they had to threaten me back, basically.
Oh, wow. What have been your tactics and approaches in dealing with that situation, and where do you see potentials in especially the electronic music culture? Does the electronic music culture lend itself to more acceptance or a better environment for that?
Well, I don't think it's much different than anywhere else in the end. I mean, yeah, people should be more open-minded, but the biases, they kind of go really deep and people don't think about them. So it's very difficult to kind of even be aware of it. So the only thing that really helps in that regard is just to talk about this stuff. Yeah, I know it gets kind of boring and tiring, but it gets tiring to kind of experience sexism as well. So, and then otherwise, just kind of showing girls already that they can do that. So I actually like doing Girls' Day here in Germany, where girls can go into male-dominated professions and see if they like this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it's really exciting. Like the first group I had was 20 girls between 11 and 14, and it was crazy. They had so many ideas, and they asked pretty advanced questions really early on as well, where you just go like, wow, they just picked this up much faster, and it was really exciting. And they did really cool tracks. They only had 2 hours, and they all built like a short track in that time. So, and I was not sitting still for a second during that time. So I think just kind of showing them that it's possible. But the thing is, like, the way you have to show this as well, by making women visible that do this sort of thing as for a living as well. I'm still unhappy with the fact, for example, that I had to be hired to kind of do these things because they don't have any female teachers there. Lecturers, and professors, and so that kind of you see it's basically kind of a problem in all areas, and you kind of have to improve kind of every single area, and that obviously is going to take quite a lot of time.
Right.
But I'm happy that compared to say 10 years ago, there's a lot more women who now say that they're interested in going into music production themselves, so that there definitely is more interest since a lot of groups and networks have been trying to here we are there. We're just often not booked as much. That's that's another thing. Like if you count like how many exist and who's getting booked, and quite frankly, quite often the women that stick around, they're the ones that are really good, and because they're enthusiastic, so they just keep learning all the time, and so they tend to be better than the average man doing this sort of thing because it's tougher. So the ones that stick around, they just really go for it, and they're still not being booked, which means that it has very little to do with them not being good enough, but them just not getting thought of as capable enough simply because of their sex. And I think that's a problem. And I mean, there's some festivals now who started saying like they want to try and reach 50-50. Mm-hmm. And the ones that tried, they all managed to get their numbers. So apparently it is easily possible to create a cool festival and not just invite mostly men.
What would you recommend as resources or groups or networks to reach out to?
Well, there's definitely Female Pressure, which is the one that is, I only know if that's very like international. Mm-hmm. It is Eurocentric, and it's a lot of it is in Berlin and Vienna. Because of the founders, but we have musicians from lots of countries by now. There's also local groups always that should be checked out, but I don't necessarily know which ones there are. There's more and more springing up as well. It's kind of hard to keep track, which is a good thing. I quite frankly, I never thought about this years ago, because I don't know, it just never occurred to me that there could be even groups like that, and that they could be helpful. I just kind of did my thing, and then there definitely always were other women as well. I think that for me, like Kate Bush was my first kind of hero in that sense, that I was like, she's producing everything herself, and it's kind of very different music compared to what others did in that time. And apart from the production, I feel like the music's still not very old. And I think that's kind of, I would just suggest to kind of Google and or like just look on Facebook. I think there's a ton of Facebook groups now. There's also another group called Sister. I think that's also for electronic musicians. Female ones, I'm not sure if they include trans or non-binary, but that would be listed in a link. So there's quite a lot of resources now. I would go from Female Pressure on the website. There's also other resources linked. So, for example, interesting websites for learning music production techniques, for example, or other groups that do similar things, because there are more and more coming up. Quite frankly, with that sort of thing, I've kind of feel like I'm a bit out of the loop as well, because like in the last few years, I've been holed up a lot in here, and just trying to keep Sonic Bloom alive and myself.
Which is always a good thing.
I mean, I succeeded, so that's a good thing. Everything else, is going to come now within the next year again, that I'm kind of out and about more.
For a while, we've been seeing loads of new developments in the production of musical instruments now. There are all kinds of alternative controllers, small yet flexible, affordable devices. At the same time, we are also witnessing the reappearance of certain devices in the shape and form of clones or reissues. So there's a retromaniac aspect as well, very strong one. The internet redefined the interaction between manufacturers and customers, and we have an ever-burgeoning Eurorack scene. All kinds of niche markets seem to make a huge leap forward. And as someone who's been involved in questions about music technology on an almost daily basis, and as someone who's henceforth also exposed to a raise awareness about what's going on and the latest developments, like you've been moderating the German Gear Talk, Muso Talk a couple of times. What are the tendencies that seem to be most significant from your point of view?
A lot of it was about synths. So basically, hardware synths kind of became a big thing all of a sudden again a couple of years ago. So we're now seeing new ones being made and reissues as well. And the modular synths scene that used to be like tiny is becoming more popular as well, and semi-modulars. Otherwise, I find like a lot of the controllers that have come out, they're all very boxed in the sense how you have or you're supposed to use them. So it seems to be a lot of things that are geared to the consumer market and not to professionals. So, for example, I've been having trouble finding a hardware sampler that is a sampler, not a sample player only.
Oh, okay.
That is small, so that there's actually not very. You'd think from the 80s until now there would be something that more like this, but there isn't. And there's I think the most exciting area is where like all the smaller boutique companies kind of trying to do their own things, especially with controllers that can be very interesting. Like there's a lot of gesture controllers that are being developed now, and I find that a very interesting subject, because I feel like those, like I tried the iPad as a controller for a while, and it just seemed like a good idea, but it just didn't work as well, because you always had to watch and look what you were doing, which is kind of counter performance,
right?
I
mean, you as a original guitarist must be interested in something like the Linstrument.
Yeah, the Linstrument is interesting, definitely. I haven't even had a chance to play it yet, so that would be interesting. I also like the Rolly boards, for example. But when I tried them, I kind of always got stuck a bit. So
I can relate to that.
The rubber kind of didn't feel quite right for me. Maybe that's I tend to have very dry fingertips, so maybe that can be an issue sometimes, because I've had that with other instruments that use the skin contact basically as well.
Like the Buchla ones.
Yeah, exactly. The Lin instrument is really interesting. I'm hoping for other people kind of to pick up the array system, the one that my array and Bira is built on. It's basically built on the circle of fifth. So it's very musical in the sense how it can be used. It's very that for me personally would be the instrument that I would use to explain music theory to children, because it's all very logical, and it's way more logical than on a piano layout, or even, like I think the guitar layout is even worse to understand. Basically, music theory because with the piano you have all the keys just in one after the other. At least you still have to kind of like white and black, and you have that difference. On the guitar, it's kind of like it seems more complex because the notes are repeated and everything. And I think that kind of array system is very logical for the way at least Europeans decided music theory and composition should work. And I wish that was going to be picked up for push too, for like the layout as well, to be honest, because I think that's something they completely miss out on yet. So things like that, I'm still kind of. So I see basically really cool ideas, and then only one small company does it, and no one else kind of picks up on the idea, even though it's kind of very logically conclusive. So like if you use the circle of fifth to basically arrange where the notes on the push should be, it would be much easier actually to play in a lot of ways. But instead they go back to how it's done on the guitar, for example, and things like that. So I feel like there's a lot of very interesting ideas, but they're not being realized in a bigger way.
So there hasn't been yet the big game changer for you?
No, I mean, like one big game changer could be for me the Mimio gloves, because I've been looking into this kind of gesture controller thing for a long time because it seems like a very natural way for me to kind of do things. So I've been using Wiimotes for a long time, and they're still the most stable, unless you get Mimio gloves, because they were really great for even playing basically like air drums. And I felt like there was no latency that you could feel, and normally you always have this slight latency problem with everything still, and or something can't stay mapped properly, and so something doesn't react. Like for example, I have the emojis as well, and I've tried the Leap Motion, and they're great, but at the same time they're not as reliable as I would like them to be. So I would not use them live because they just might not work exactly in the moment. And if they sometimes don't work while rehearsing, you kind of can be sure that that's going to be a problem on stage, because that's how things work. And so I'm kind of like, the Mimio gloves are really exciting at the moment. The problem is still that a pair is quite expensive. It's like 5,500 British pounds. So that's I mean, I can get a computer, good studio monitors, an audio interface, and a microphone definitely for that sort of money. So that's a huge investment. But I know they're working on a version that is cheaper, because they have been developing new ways how they don't have to sew the sensors in and everything. So it's not hand sewed anymore, and that drops the price quite considerably. So they're working on a new version, and I'm very, very tempted. I'm on the list, so I think I'm going to get a pair and just kind of not think of the money that I have to spend at once about it, because I really like them. I mean, it's going to be an adjustment as well, because like if you use them for like half an hour, you just go like, oh God, my arms are really tired, because you're not used to kind of holding your arms up a lot.
Sure.
We'd rather do the opposite. But I find like it seems more natural, although I know already that they also still have their kind of boundaries where I feel like it's not going far enough, but I'm not sure if that's ever going to be possible, because even every single instrument you kind of have to learn at first.
Mhm.
So there's always going to be some sort of learning curve.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know, for me, I kind of stopped looking that much into music technology after a few years of just looking at everything over and over all the time. I feel like the market is going like, oh, so this is the new trend, and now we're going to do this. Instead of saying, let's do something completely different and see how someone reacts. So I feel like no one's taking much risks anymore. For me, I think one of the most exciting companies is Teenage Engineering, because they try to do fun, cheap, apart from the OP1, like the pocket operators. Like they're small, you can use them anywhere, and the way they're set up is very intuitive. So they thought about how someone would use it, and it really makes things easier. And I think that's really exciting. But I feel like we need more of that, where people just kind of not just go like, okay, so we've had the launch pad, now we're going to do another grid control, and we're just going to add some knobs or something. I feel like there's too much of that right now, and not much innovation if you compare it to, at least not from the bigger companies, as it used to be. Like if you look at like the 80s, like 70s, 80s, or whatever, all the new technology that was coming out back then, it was the bigger companies, and they were doing kind of really quite often as well, and doing really exciting new things where they took risks to see if people would want this stuff.
Yeah.
And now that's doesn't seem to be happening as much anymore in hardware, I feel.
So gestural controllers are one big thing for you, but how about collaborative opportunities? Do you see any reason for optimism when it comes to the internet as a platform for global collaborations?
Yeah, I mean, like I for example, I've done things like I needed a cello on a song, and a friend of mine in Canada is a cellist, so I just could send him the files, and he would send me the recordings back, which makes things much easier. So I like it. Of course, a lot of people would like to be able to even like do it basically live. So they'd be connected and just working on things at the same time, which still, of course, is like very difficult because you get latency.
Right.
So this is basically a physical limitation that might never really properly go away. But I think basically the internet is just a tool, so it can be good and it can be bad. And this is something where it can be really good, because we can use it to work with people that we could never see in person, because we wouldn't be able to afford the plane tickets or something. And you can stay in touch with lots of people as well. So even if you don't collaborate now, because you're both busy or one is just too busy, you just can stay in touch much easier now, and could say like, well, let's have a look at in a year or whatever. So.
I was just asking that because, some really embrace it. Others say, well, you can't really reproduce anything online that is taking place in an actual physical space, like a rehearsal room or whatever.
The thing is, it doesn't replace seeing people in real life. If you're just basically, in touch with people always through the internet, there's certain components that I'm going to be missing. And you probably will end up feeling quite lonely, because it just can't replace it. And I think that's not how this kind of should be seen. But it's like, the thing is, like, for example, with my music, it's not the way it's recorded for the album is not something that could ever be played live like this. If I play it live, I play it differently, and the focus is not on the details as much, for example, because like an album is for hopefully eternity. So hopefully people will listen to the album over and over and over. And so the idea for me is that I want to have details in there that people will only hear after listening to it 10 times, and so on and so forth. So the approach is quite different. And then, it would be someone coming into my, so say I've done that with the cellist as well. So she came into my studio and we just recorded the cello parts, with her headphones on, and I'm sitting in the same room. But it's not very different from just giving the recordings and maybe say a few words what you kind of want. I tend to give the sheet music as well because a lot of classical musicians prefer that. Mm-hmm. And then they record it. The only difference is you're not in the room to say like, oh, this was an amazing take, or maybe you could just, change this and that. So the feedback kind of is not as direct, obviously.
Right.
But I prefer working with people where I just kind of give them just a rough idea and just kind of explain what the feeling kind of should be like or something. And then just say like, well, just play that. And then if you have other ideas, you're welcome to just record that as well. So last time I just got a lot of interesting kind of things where he started doing something with the cello bow that kind of were just kind of crackly, scratchy sounds that I could add in different places that made the song overall more interesting as well. So I don't think it's necessarily worse. I mean, it depends on what your approach is. Like if you want to have a live sounding recording, then collaborating online is definitely not going to be ideal. But it's just really, it has everything has its pros and cons, and so it wouldn't be great for that sort of thing, but it's great to just find the musicians that are, they have the same ideas about how something should be, for example, because everyone approaches music differently as well. So just finding like-minded people in your town, for example, might be difficult, but then you could find someone at the other end of the world and they approach music and how creativity should work just exactly the same way. And they might have even like a similar sound aesthetic or some an opposing sound aesthetic that makes the combination very interesting or something. And that is a big plus that you can't get if you just look for people in your area.
Never get involved in a band with people who share exactly your taste.
Yeah. I would basically, not the same taste, but like, for example, is the way of the understanding of how music should basically work. Like that doesn't say anything about genres, for example, or anything, or what kind of music they listen to. But basically some kind of fundamental principles about how you approach things might be helpful if they're similar, because if you work the exact same, like for example, if someone likes to just play and jam the whole time and the other goes like, well, I rather prefer just sitting in my room and just kind of doing things on my own, that's probably not going to be a good combination of people. So this is where I like it when I prefer working with people who have a very different kind of musical taste quite often, because you always kind of get go to the cross section or something, and then you just kind of find something where it both fits, and then so it kind of creates something new. So yeah, I find that much more exciting as well. Than for example, I don't understand people who just want to do like dubstep the whole time or whatever genre really.
Is it still a thing?
I don't know. It kind of, I mean, at least in advertising, and dubstep is still a thing, right? So someone must be making dubstep tracks. But like in general, like there's no, I find it boring to just say like, I'm going to just do this one genre, because especially in electronic music, the genres are, there's so many subgenres. So if you do this one style of techno and you add one thing, you change one thing, it's already another subgenre, and that would drive me insane. I just couldn't do. I don't understand where one category ends and the next one starts. Anyways, I just.
If you open the high pass filter just a little bit, you're in a different genre.
See, and that's I mean, I don't know. I also like, the one thing I don't teach is how to create a certain genre. I don't teach that because I never even considered trying to sound like anyone else.
Right.
And I think that kind of hinders your creativity as well. I think it's rather more interesting to learn the underlying sound engineering skills and then use them for whatever comes into your head, and just maybe you're the one creating something completely new.
Mm-hmm. Transcend the genres. That's a good note to end upon.
Okay.
And I really want to thank you for taking your time. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. And I'm looking forward to your album once it's finished.
That might still be a while. I'm actually going to try and see if any labels want it again before I release it myself again. I don't know. There might be an option. And I just thought, like, the thing is, like, I don't want to spend all my time doing everything but music, because with Sonic Bloom, I'm already doing quite a lot of things that are very music related, and but it's not my own music, and so I would kind of like to do that with someone else. So it might even be a bit longer till it's get released.
Well, if you need any help, let me know.
Okay, I will do.